Bright Cutie. Every student matters.
Hello everyone. So let's start a new topic here, that is the Great Depression. Now before this, students, you have learnt about the rise of mass production and consumption. Now when we were talking about rise of mass production and consumption, we were referring to which country, students? Yes, we were referring to the United States. And we saw that how by 1923, United States started lending these loans to all the countries, or after the World War, right? After the First World War, we see that how United States, it became an international creditor. Now I am repeating this point again and again. Why? Because it is quite important to understand this. Because it was creating its dominance in this European world, right? The European powers who were dominating once upon a time. Now here we see that United States had a stable economy after the First World War, unlike many other European powers, right, who were involved in the war and who had to suffer a lot of economic setbacks there, right? So here there is this period of Great Depression. Now what do you understand by the term Great Depression? Have you heard this term, that is Great Depression? The Great Depression, students, it means or it denotes severe worldwide economic depression or economic setback that started in the year 1929, and it started from the United States of America. Yes, students, you have to remember this point. Now before this, we were understanding the whole idea how United States, it turned into international creditor. Now this was a country who was giving loans to different countries. But what situation led to this Great Depression? And how did it even start from the United States? We have to understand the whole concept here. We will also try to understand how India was impacted through the Great Depression. So like I told you, it was an economic depression. Economic depression, what does that mean? So definitely it means a period of unemployment, a state in which people have no jobs, right? Low profits, low prices on goods, high poverty and standstill trade market that affected the whole world in 1930s. So when we are referring to this Great Depression, it means a period of worldwide economic depression. Economic depression, it implies this period of unemployment, the setback or standstill in trade all over the world, fall in the prices of goods, and also rising poverty. And profits, definitely that would be minimal. So these were some of the changes that took place in the year 1929. And the worst hit sectors were heavy industries, agriculture, mining and logging. All these industries were worst hit by the Great Depression. Why? Because people had no jobs. These people, they could not make any profit, and also there was standstill trade in all these sectors. Now this started mainly, or the main factor, one of the main factors as we can say, was the crash of stock market of 1929. Where? In the United States. So in the stock exchange markets, we see that there was a total crash of the stock market that happened in the year 1929. So basically you will understand this term in your economics section as well. So here you have to just understand that one of the factors that also aggravated and led to the Great Depression was the crash of stock market that happened in the United States. Now depression ended in 1935 finally, because the starting period was not same everywhere. Here we see that in 1929 it happened in United States. Somewhere we see that it started in the early 1930s and so on. But finally depression, it ended in 1935 and it caused many political changes. Definitely, when we are talking about United States, the then president, whose name was Franklin D. Roosevelt, he introduced some new reforms in order to tackle the economic setback that was happening in his country. And therefore, he introduced some reforms that was known as New Deal. Now, this was considered as a constructive program. After the Great Depression, this was termed as a constructive program that was initiated by Franklin D. Roosevelt. So, he introduced some federal relief programs for the sectors that were worst hit and also people who were hit by this Great Depression. Aid to agriculture, because one of the sectors that was worst hit was the agriculture sector. The peasants, the poor families, they were impacted with this, and the labor unions. Definitely they had also been impacted with this Great Depression because they were working in these heavy industries. Now, let us have a look at some of the factors that led to the Great Depression. Now, the first and foremost factor here, students, is the agricultural overproduction that was made worse by falling agriculture prices. Now, at one time, what are we seeing in this 19th, 20th century? We see that there is an overproduction of crops or other commodities here in agriculture, and because of this overproduction, when there are a lot of products, the prices tend to fall. So the agricultural prices, it was falling. Now farmers, they then tried to expand production and bring larger volume of produce to the markets to keep up their overall income. So definitely, if the agricultural prices are falling, who is going to get this impact? Who is going to feel the brunt of it? The farmers, the peasants who are working in these fields. Am I right or not? Yes. So, all these farmers, now they try to expand production. They are going to produce a lot and bring larger volume of produce to the market. So, definitely the prices have fallen down, but the quantities have been increased in the market so that they can balance their overall income. Now, was it correct or not? Here we see that this became one of the reasons for the Great Depression. Again, in the late 1920s, the prices of shares in the stock exchange market or the share market in the US had been forced up beyond their real value. So the real value was something else, and the prices of these shares was going up, right? So in October 1929, people, they started to sell their shares rapidly. Now in one day, 13 million shares were sold on the New York Stock Exchange. Now imagine in one day, 13 million shares were being sold up. Now how was this economy doing here? Definitely it was quite bad. It led to economic crisis. Again, it became one of the factors for the Great Depression, and because of this, banks were closed down in many countries, be it the United States, Latin America, and some other countries, right? So these banks were closed, businesses were closed, and it led to an increase in unemployment. So the banks were worst hit by this, right? And by 1932, 12 million people, they were unemployed. Now this was the situation in 1932. So somehow till 1932, these people who were worst hit by the Great Depression, they had to somewhat suffer in one way or the another. Apart from this, drought made the situation worse. Acute shortage of food, rising poverty were some other reasons, students, that also aggravated the Great Depression. right? There was already an economic crisis that was happening worldwide, but apart from that, there was not sufficient food, the prices were falling, and also rising poverty in that condition because people were not employed. In 1933, like I told you, New Deal, that was a constructive program, was promised by Franklin D. Roosevelt. Farm prices were supported by many other programs of constructions were started by him. So this is how he decided to deal with the Great Depression. Okay? Now coming to our country here. We have understood the whole concept of Great Depression, the factors that led to the Great Depression. Here we have to talk about our country, how our country was impacted by the Great Depression here. So we also see that in India, the exports, they declined. Somewhere near 1928 to 1934, India's export declined. Here we are seeing that India was again exporter of raw materials or agricultural commodities. Correct? So we see that there was a decline in this. As the prices fell in the United States of different commodities, prices of wheat also fell by 50% between 1928 to 1934. Now imagine the prices are getting halved here, right? Peasants suffered more than the urban dwellers. Now why were these peasants suffering more? Because the impact was mainly on the agricultural commodities, the agricultural products, and also their whole field where they were growing crops, it was of no use. Why? Because all these crops, the prices were going down. Definitely no one is going to buy because there is a poverty all around, right? People are unemployed, acute shortage of food, and so many additional factors. Now, best example here that we can take while talking about the situation of peasants was the jute producers of Bengal. Now, these jute producers of Bengal, they produced raw jute, and the raw jute here, it was exported in gunny bags. Here we have to talk about gunny bags. Now, what are we seeing? That the exports of gunny bags, it slumped. Slumped here, it means to fall. So basically the export of gunny bags, it fell, and the prices of raw jute fell by 60%. Now imagine the situation of these jute peasants or producers of Bengal. Here they can't send this gunny bags, right? And the prices of raw jute is also falling down. Now what are they going to do? So all these people, whatever land they had, whatever money, gold, any asset that they had to go and sell those products in order to get money back. Now during this period in India, we see that people, they started exporting gold. Now there was a famous economist whose name was John Keyes, who said that Indian gold exports, it promoted global economic recovery. So according to him, the idea of exporting gold was good. Why? Because it promoted global economic recovery. Now the value of gold was high, and therefore gold was being exported. At the height of depression, when we are talking about the year 1930-31, what we see in India during that period, civil disobedience was launched by Mahatma Gandhi. So these were the situations of peasants and how this movement also started in our country. Urban dwellers somewhat had to face lesser brunt of the Great Depression because somehow they managed to get rents, and the middle class, they were the salaried employees, right? So therefore, they did not have to face all these problems that the peasants were facing. So students, that was all about the Great Depression and India and the Great Depression. Coming to our exercise section, the first question here is, who started the New Deal? Now, do you remember the name that we learned right now? It was the President of United States, whose name was Franklin D. Roosevelt. Okay? Now in long answer question, there is a question. Examine why the Great Depression was a catastrophic event for the United States of America. Now how are you going to answer this question, students? Here you have to talk about, first give a brief description of Great Depression. What was it? Worldwide economic depression that took place in the year, or it started in the year 1929 in the United States with the fall of the stock market, right? But how did it impact the United States, or was it a catastrophic event? Yes, it was a catastrophic event for the people of United States. Why? Because we see that 13 million shares were sold in United States. Stock market crashed. You have to write these points here. Banks were closed. Banks and businesses were closed. Right? High unemployment, high poverty, situation of unemployment, huge debt. So these are some of the points that you have to mention here that I am writing down. So mention all these points in your answer here, students. Now what changes did Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal bring about? Do you remember that? Here we are talking about the constructive programs that was being introduced for agriculture, aid for agriculture. In this we have to talk about the federal programs as well for the federal help. Right? Talk about the federal programs. Aid for agriculture. Write about the labor unions. So how these constructive programs that were introduced in order to recover from the Great Depression. So this is how you have to answer this question. Explain the causes of Great Depression. Here students, talk about the three factors that we have mentioned. The first one was the overproduction of agricultural prices. Agricultural goods, commodities, whatever. And how farmers were impacted. 1920s we see the shares, the prices of shares going beyond the real value in America. How did it impact? Apart from that, rise in poverty, unemployment since the banks and business were closed. These were some of the factors that led to the Great Depression.